In part one, Kyle and Megan and I started to talk about the gap between the work people do and the way we've been trained to describe it. We talked about where that comes from. We talked about what it costs. And now we're going to talk about what to do with it. Kyle wrote a chapter. He's leading the exercise, and the three of us are going to go through it out loud together. Welcome to Wired to Build, the podcast exploring how owners, operators, and builders navigate the systems, decisions, and realities shaping the built environment. I'm your host, Nick Caravella, and as always, I'm glad you're here because this show isn't about chasing tools or buzzwords. It's about understanding how work actually gets done, where it breaks down, and what it takes to build with clarity at scale. So whether you're an owner, a builder, or someone living in the space in between, you're in the right place. Let's get wired to build. Before we dive in, I want to acknowledge our founding sponsor, Avocado. Avocado partners with owners and delivery teams on complex capital programs to help them make technology work, aligning strategy, implementation, and real-world execution across the full project lifecycle. If you're investing in construction technology, digital delivery, or data initiatives, and struggling to turn those investments into real outcomes, Avocado helps teams move from intention to impact. You can learn more at avocado.com. So, for people who are just joining us, last episode we talked a lot about success, what it means, what Ripple Intent does as a community, and the very important part of understanding people on our teams and how we quote people through people. And so today's episode's special. If you listened to the last episode where I had Kyle on, we kind of turned the mic over to him and talked about curiosity. Today, we're going to dig into success and what it means for us as people within the built world. And so, Kyle, I want to tee this up with the question of, how is it possible for us to do this exercise honestly in front of an audience? Or do you feel that the mic perhaps changes a little bit of what we're going to say?
There's a little bit of that. In our case, though, between the three of us, it'll be just fine. We've done this process multiple times, each of us individually. Megan and I have done it together. We've done it with other groups. We lead separate groups from time to time, and so we're very comfortable with the process and some of the things that'll come out publicly for those who are out. The changes when you have a broad audience, but when you're sitting with 3, 4, 5 people, it really does not matter. Even though they could be perfect strangers, the process itself helps build that level of trust, that security, that I hate to say psychological safety because that's such an abused term these days, but it builds a sense of comfort to where you can have the discussion that ultimately really matters.
Yeah. Well, I think if to anybody who's listening along with us, use this as an opportunity to pause, write down your own responses and participate in this with us. We're obviously not going to be able to hear, but we'd love for you to explore the topic of success as we go through it. So Kyle, without further ado, I'll turn it to you and let's start to explore what this means to us.
That sounds good. Well, let's jump right in with the whole thing about success. So when we were talking about what topic and what do we want to try to accomplish in this conversation, Megan, you suggested let's explore the concept of success. And of course, like I mentioned on the last episode, a million questions start running through my mind. But I think the first one is we do need to, I'd say level set, but I think we should hear from each one of us. Well, what does the word success mean to us? How are we raised to see success? And what has been celebrated in our lives that relates to or is quote unquote successful?
Also going back to sharing to an audience, I think if anybody out there is concerned about being too honest or too vulnerable, just know that I've probably overshared way more than you have, because I think if I have a reputation for anything, it's being too vulnerable. So I'll start there. But I grew up on a farm, and I think success was a very defined thing for me from a pretty early age to continue to farm, and choosing to not do that, I think, has been difficult. And I think that's where a lot of my redefining success has started. And I think for me, success is taking this deep understanding of yourself and being able to apply it to whatever you've chosen to do with your life, whether it is your volunteer work or your family or your job that pays your bills. It's understanding yourself and being able to fully show up.
I love that a lot because for me, I feel like the definition of success has evolved a lot over my time, and I've raised in like a traditional Catholic family, came over in 1903, so a lot of traditional mindset, and then that's what I've been breaking down my entire journey through this around what does it mean to have that like success as provider as man of household, and what does it mean to be successful within my community and my relationships, and the integrity of what does success look like and how do I need to behave and how does the world need to see me has always been something interesting. And that target really started to move when I decided to leave the traditional practice of architecture because my folks didn't understand it. I went to school for 5 years. I did all the stuff. I took all the exams, and I was like, maybe I'll just not do architecture anymore. And ever since stepping foot on that journey, I feel like I've gotten closer and closer to success than I've ever been because I've allowed myself to get out of the bounds of how other people defined it for me. And kind of connects to your answer, Megan, of like, how do I show up as my true self and make the true difference I can make being me?
That's interesting. I mean, Megan, you grew up in Kansas City. I grew up in Chicago, so we kind of lump them together and call them Midwest. See, for me, it was very clear that success was job, house, kids, dog, cars, power, money. That was all success. How you got there? Yeah, of course there was judgment. If you were, I'm going to be an actor. Oh, okay. Starving artist, ha ha ha, and a lot of that stuff. So there's a lot of judgment in the family, and a lot of judgment in the extended family and the neighbors. But that was kind of the expectation. Was here's the prescribed path of life that you will go down, and therefore you'll be successful. Not knowing what you were going to do, that wasn't very successful. You should figure that out during high school, preferably early in high school. And if you don't, then there's something not right with you, and you need to go fix that. That was always my favorite. You need to go fix that.
But are we ever really broken? Like, there's something to fix?
Right. No, absolutely not. Yeah.
When I was in college, I was changing majors for the 57th time. And I remember saying to my great aunt that I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. And I just couldn't find my spot and all those things. And she said to me, when I was your age, you were either a nun, a teacher, or a mother. And I did two of the three things. So I couldn't imagine being in your shoes trying to decide one path out of all of the tons of paths that you have in front of you to choose from. And I was like, well, me just crying at my family reunion here. It was so healing to hear that to hear someone say there's not one path.
Yeah, and then the complicated and say there were only 3 for me, but there's like 4,000 for you. So good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh.
I was going to say, I think that's one of the ways that you can kind of help yourself navigate that. It's like, I had another aunt. I have a lot of smart aunts. But I had another aunt that said, you're not a tree. You can move. And then you can move again. Like you don't have to plant yourself. And I think that's a great way to be like open to being to that self-discovery, especially if it hasn't happened in a way that you think is fast enough or early enough on in your career. Like you can pursue self-discovery at all ages and stages and make any changes along the way that you feel like.
Well, I think what's cool about that too is just like everyone's experience is unique to them and their perspective is unique to them. So something that has been a guiding principle for me is that everyone, no matter their age, background, whatever, has at least one unique thing that they could teach me because I haven't walked in their shoes and I haven't lived their life, and this capacity to, do something different than what everyone else does or is expecting of you is a testament to being able to walk all of those different paths.
So we're starting to get in a little bit of an application of success. And I want to hold this back for just a moment while we finish defining. So we talk about how others possibly have either projected or shared their point of view of success of us in both, mostly in life. But what about in work? Are there people that project onto you and say, okay, you are in this position? Nick, you're an architect. Megan, you're in BD. Therefore, in order to succeed in those roles, here's the success metrics. And to show that you are a successful person, your next career steps should be X, Y, or Z. Has that happened?
This is like an interesting one and a great one, I think, because in my second year, I think, at my firm, I had some we as a firm had some big losses. And I went into my yearly review and my boss said, "Hey, it looks like you were mostly negative and pretty hard on yourself, and you didn't feel like you were successful this year at all. And everyone else reviewed you in a much higher light. And I just want to talk through that with you." And we started talking about, "Oh, maybe I lost these projects." And that was the main driver of me feeling like I wasn't successful. But he helped remind me that I also set up a meet and greet with 3 new clients that year that we had never even had the chance to get in the door to have a conversation with. And I had helped a new project manager go to however many events. And he brought up all these different measures for me that it was really helpful to get that perspective that the measures that I thought were the measures of success, I had failed on. But then when I had different measures to look at, different metrics to look at, I was able to see the successes.
That's I got a story that goes the exact opposite way.
No.
No, and I think it's good to kind of contrast it because I was really involved in the American Institute of Architects when I was a young professional because when I saw it as an opportunity to network and get to meet people who were practicing all over the world, and it absolutely was. But I was involved in a lot of leadership things, and I represented the state. I was sitting on national boards, and had the great fortune of having so many mentors through that experience because I had to work with the presidents of states and regions and whatnot. And we were all out to dinner the one day, and I was talking about it, like an experience I had in my fraternity in college. And one of my mentors stopped me and he yelled at me. He's like, you really shouldn't share stories like that. And because, people are going to see you as immature or all of these other different things. And at that time, I am, and I very probably at that time I still am. I'm very strong of myself, and if I'm pointed in a direction, it's sometimes hard to change it. And I said, how dare you? Those things that I went through, whether it was in my fraternity or the different activities I had done throughout my life, were formative. And yeah, I've made mistakes doing dumb things as any college kid may do, but they helped me understand a lot more about myself. And if those flaws aren't things you can accept of me, then how could you ever truly accept me as a peer in that space? And where I'm going with it is I think that was the first moment that hardened myself around making sure that I was being my authentic self and not being who people wanted me to be. And he's still a mentor of mine, great peers and great friends, but it was just something that had it shook me. I left that dinner afterwards and was like, should I be sharing who I am as a person when I'm not at work, my not professional self? Or should I, embrace me as who I am and let me shine, flaws and all? And there's probably a halfway answer there. You don't need to let all your flaws get out there. But it just was a moment where what I thought of me was challenged and that I needed to be something other than I was. But I was able in that moment to hold my line, which I always look back and reflect, and I'm proud of myself for not letting someone else define how I needed to behave or act in a situation.
That's very thoughtful, and self-aware. At the same time, there's situations where that's really sage advice.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of truth to it. And I think that was what I was trying to navigate, though, was like this aspect of, I think in order to be successful, like you have to want the success that you have. And shame is probably a good mirror to hold up to things of, we're going to make mistakes. We're humans. And if I allow the things that I did before with the information I had at that time and not having, I guess, compassion for who I was when I was younger, that shame can be all consuming, and it can give a lot of power to the voice that says you're not worthy.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm curious, Nick, where do you think your measure of success, that being true to yourself, being a measure of success, where do you think that came from?
I think
Sorry, Kyle, I've been facilitating for too long. I just took over.
No, it's a good one, and it's a loaded one. I think my dad has really contributed a lot to that, because it's, he's always instilled in me, like, leave the world better than you found it. And I know he's like, I think as any human has had struggles in his own life. And the more, and the older I've gotten, the more I've gotten to know my father as a person, and I've gotten to know his flaws and things that he's hidden away from me as I've gotten older, and as we've like more become adults together rather than a kid and their father. And watching my dad become his more true self to me has helped me build an appreciation of why I should be my true self to myself.
Honoring that in yourself and others.
Yeah. So the question that keeps coming, so I mentioned before, like there's that is sage advice to not be yourself. And I think this is where a lot of people start getting mixed signals. I'm authentic, so I'm going to show up in my pajamas, or I'm just going to swear and say whatever I want. It's like that's not, there is a such thing as social norms, and there's something about being polite and being respectful. And, you go meet a new client for the first time, Megan, you're not like, hey, yeah, nice to meet you. I got drunk every other couple of weeks when I was in college. And they're like, oh, I mean, that's just strange. So, there is a time, but as you read the room and as you go through life, I think it's very normal as we learn repeatedly when we screw up, like you did. Now, you didn't screw up, but when those moments happen and someone says, hey, you shouldn't have done that thing, then we have a choice. And it's either, okay, then I won't do that thing anymore, because clearly I got hurt or I got burnt. I touched the stove. I'm not going to do it. Or you question with good thought, is that advice applicable? Where is it applicable? And when should I pay attention to it?
And I think that's on the nose of like why I got so upset in the moment, because these were people that I had already come to know. The walls were down. This wasn't like I was in front of a new customer or whatever, and I needed to like show the decorum. Like, this was getting to know each other. And I think what was so hurtful in that moment was like, in that opportunity to take off my armor and share who I was to people who I've cultivated trust with, I was then told I shouldn't do that, which I agree is sage advice in a moment of decorum and presentation. But it was weird advice to be getting in a moment where, well, we already knew each other, and perhaps you just finished telling a story about how you were being a goofball. So like, now I'm not allowed. And so I think that's where it was like so troubling and so off-putting, was because I think the relationship wasn't at the same stage. I had looked at these folks as peers now, and maybe he was still really looking toward me as a mentee. And so maybe I surprised him just as much as he surprised me. But yeah, it was a very interesting moment. But that is, going back to my father, I think he's really shown me like, if you're building real relationships with people, you have to be real in order to have real relationships.
Yeah, that's well said. The it is always surprising, right? Where you think you have a relationship, or you have trust, or you feel comfortable, or in our case, right, you get to success, and you're like, hey, that was successful, and someone's like, actually, it wasn't. It's like, again, a couple of different reactions there. One is, screw you, I was successful. And another one is like, I shouldn't be celebrating. You're right. That wasn't worth celebrating. I'm going to go beat myself up for a while and then I'll come back and we'll pretend like it never happened. Or you get the affirmation. And that is when it suddenly becomes that internal dialogue between what is the external world telling me and the people around me telling me, and what do I believe?
I think that's the self-compassion in either and all of those situations too, right? It's like when you make a mistake and you're not achieving success, whether it's your definition or someone else's definition, can you look at yourself with compassion and say, it's okay, I did make that mistake? Or say, I don't think I agree with that, but I can understand why I behaved the way I did, and I can let go of that and forgive myself. Um, and then I think the other way as well, if you do achieve that success, being able to, it's a kind of a different form of self-compassion almost, but being able to allow yourself to feel good. Because I think sometimes we don't want to allow that. Because if we allow ourselves to be like, yeah, you did a good job, Megan, then maybe that's as far as I'll ever get. Maybe that's the only success I'll ever have. And that's scary.
I hear that so much because every time I ever worked on my portfolio when I was still practicing, I just was like, I'd hate putting projects in it because I'd remember all the things that went wrong. And so like nothing is worthy. And like having to overcome that like self-criticism of like, well, no, this is still work that I did and work that I'm proud of. And like, yeah, sure, I learned some lessons on it, but it was still great work and I need to be able to celebrate that. But I think in the industry, like based on design, you can oftentimes be way too self-critical and not allow yourself to celebrate those wins.
Yeah, and a lot of organizations unfortunately fall into that trap of the annual review where we're going to talk about the results. So what are the results? And that usually means what are the good results for the year? Where did you impact and benefit the organization? Even though we say things like, let's learn from our mistakes. I've never seen an HR review that says, write down all the mistakes and failures you had this year. And what did you learn from them? Or better yet, describe how humble you were and all the examples of humility that you I mean, these are the things that we want. And these are the things that we often individually value. But when the organization overlays its version of success, it's like, let's just talk about the results. I was going to say, maybe we can get there in a roundabout way, because it's like, well, I was humble, or I did this, or I failed over here, and then I learned, and then we applied it over here, and then we won. So it's more like a means to get to the results. But when it's explicit, it never is explicit.
That's what I was going to say something similar, because I've thought about that with like RFQ, RFP responses, where we see when people ask for lessons learned, and it's kind of that exactly what you're saying of like, this thing went wrong and this is how we fixed it, and it ultimately ended up being really successful. And I kind of wish there was just a question that was like, what truly went wrong? And just you had to answer just that. Not what you learned from it, but just tell us exactly what went wrong.
It gets me thinking when I went to the avocado, it was Avi had interviewed me and he, instead of asking about what went wrong, he asked me about a time that I had to hold myself accountable. And that was like the biggest Twix moment of any interview I ever had. Cause I was like, oh, he's asking me like, not only when did I mess up, but like, when did I have to like go and own that as well? And to me, that I just realized like I want to work with this guy because he's going to challenge me to think a little bit more differently about the performative side of what success looks like, and really get to more of what does it mean to own success as much as it means to own failures and like truly be accountable and own the decisions that are made, good, bad, and otherwise, on the projects and things we were working on.
Because failure is ultimately success.
Yes.
That's ultimately the definition, Kyle. Done. Failure. Success equals failure.
That's the measurement. That's what we're going to do. I mean, we and then that's So bring it back to the process for a second of just talking through success and what happens in the books. So we talked about our own personal context, what influenced that externally, internally, growing up, parents, jobs, all those things. So what influenced what ultimately we came to believe or didn't believe. Then you start talking about where does it start showing up in our life? And when we look at success, we start seeing and feeling, so the company obviously says, here's success for your job. And there's usually metrics and KPIs and that sort of stuff associated with it. And so you either succeed or you don't. Then there's the ancillary or the what we're talking about here, which is the people who recognize that success is more than just achieving a thing. And in your case, Nick, when he asks you about the accountability piece, it's like, help me understand how you learn, help me understand where you fail, help me understand how you played it forward, whether for yourself or for a team or for the people around you, whatever that may be. So we start looking about where does the whole concept of success show up in our lives. And if we had another hour, we could get into family and marriage and kids and financial success and travel and all that. I mean, all those things have some judgment that comes with them when it comes to, are you successful or not? For a long time, I was asked, it was, why don't you pursue leadership in the healthcare space? And I said, have you ever seen a healthcare leadership team picture? It looks like the before picture of a Jenny Craig team. I feel terrible saying that, but the reality is the chronic disease, the overweight, the health issues that these people carry because of the job that they're in immediately says that title, they don't look successful to me. I'm sorry. I will be, and that's not all of them, but where I was, that was pretty accurate. I mean, I don't want to stereotype, but it's pretty accurate. So that move up and make more money at what expense? So then we go into how do we, the three of us, how do we project success onto other people and expect them to live up to? Are we doing it intentionally? Are we doing it accidentally? I mean, with kids, it's really easy to project and judge and either say or silently not say what they're doing right and wrong success-wise. But you get into coworkers, family, and friends, and oh, man, you're like, all right, so if I'm doing this, if this is how I see it, how am I projecting that same expectation or similar ones or different ones onto the people around me?
Yeah, this is something that I feel like as I've elevated and started to manage teams, and people have even started to apply to want to work with me, and all the imposter syndrome that comes with that emotion, is like trying to allow people the space that I wish I was allowed when I was growing in my career. And to get on the woo-woo train, like create the safe space for people to be creative and to fail so that they can share what they're learning, and so that you create a space where people can collaborate and share the good ideas and the bad ideas, and truthfully explore what it means to solve a problem. Um, that's something that I've always aspired to create within my teams is, when we're working together on something inside the house, like I want us to fail fast, fail often, because that, as you said, Megan, like that's how we succeed, is by allowing ourselves to just use the muscles. And I've had new people come onto my teams, and, I see them, they'll like squirrel their work away, and then they'll come back with like the thing at the very end. I'm like, that was really good, but like you didn't show me how you got it done. And so like the next time we do this, I need you to show me before it's complete. I want the warts. I want what's ugly. I want to see what you're thinking, and I want to have a conversation about why as much as what. And by doing that, I've found that the people that I work with tend to bring a little bit more excitement and energy to their work, because they're not being measured by the, fake fakaka company type goals. They're being measured by the fact that they're putting an effort into something, and that they have the capacity to care about it the way that they care about it, and fight for what they want. And I try to model that behavior a lot too, and like encourage people to, like, if you disagree with something I'm saying, or, you know, what I call friction, like put friction on this. Like tell me what's wrong. Tell me what I'm missing. I have one unique point of view and I need your point of views to help me get better. And I found by like modeling what I wish I had seen in my earlier stages of being a creative professional, that I am getting more creativity and more contribution from the teams that I work with.
I've said this before and I'll say it again a million times. I think that creative or that safe space is like everything to what you said, Nick. And I think so I read this sales book that talked about how you had to do a certain amount of like cold calling. Like there was a statistic. If you did 17 cold calls, you would get at least one yes out of all of those 17 calls. But if you do 17 calls or you do 16 calls in one day and every single one of them is a no, it can be really, really defeating getting up to that final yes, unless you flip your mindset and you say, I'm going to get 16 no's today. And then you're like just collecting them. You're just putting them in the bank. Every time you're getting a no, you're like, yes, got it. And I think you do the same thing with mistakes. Like every time you make a mistake, every time you hit that failure, that point that feels like I really effed up, just put it in the bank. Just like think about that you've collected that and you can like now grow from it and learn from it and ask better questions and be more thoughtful or compassionate towards yourself. Like it's all this just collection of data to lead to your personal growth and to even more successes. So I think, yeah, if we can instill that within ourselves and then allow a safe space and inspire people to feel that same way about themselves, like that can be a really powerful team dynamic or just even dynamic amongst in your personal life, your friends and family, dynamic between manager and managee, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, to even build on that, like I've started to tell a lot of folks on my team, like I know your personal goals and your personal vision for success is probably not what I'm expecting or planning of you. And like I always try to meet them where they're at of like, where, and not to ask the trippy question, where do you want to be in 5 years? But like, what do you want to do? What do you aspire to be? How can I help you become the person that you want to be, even if that means you're going to leave this team one day? And as frustrating and as heartbreaking as it may be for me to figure out how to plug the void that is you going on to that next big thing, I don't know that I'd be successful in holding you back from achieving those things. And so, success in many ways is about cultivating the success of others, and being adaptive and flexible to all the changes that are going to come, all the challenges that are going to come in doing that. Thank you for coming on. I really do enjoy the conversation.
Cool.
And
I appreciate it.
we'll
Sorry
see
for
you.
the scheduling challenges.
We're glad you could be on.
This is a good conversation. Appreciate you both.
Bye, Kyle.
See ya.
All right. So really, this is fun. I like this actually because it's forcing me to flex outside of my comfort zone. Think of the fly, both the internet going down and running a little over schedule. So we were just talking about how we think about success and how we start to apply it. And I talked a little bit. What have things you've seen across the different, spaces you've been in around how you've applied success or created success in your community or work?
Yeah, I think you kind of touched back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the conversation and allowing someone else to fully be themselves. And I think for me, like, yes, the failures are success, but I think also vulnerability is success. And I think that's one of the best ways that I have seen people come to me and say, you helped me with this is by being that vulnerable person, showing up as my full self does allow others to see that they can show up as their full selves. And I think that's like you said, I think that's kind of the most powerful thing to lead to individual success and that team success.
Yeah. And I almost want to like think about this a little bit more in terms of external validation. Because a lot of our early stories talked about like other people and how they kind of impacted our view.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's how often do you, I guess you find yourself seeking external validation for your success? Do you need it? Do you resist that validation sometimes? I know personally, like the best way to make me think I'm not doing a good job is to tell me I am doing a good job. It's weird and backwards, but that's just how my brain works. So I'm curious how that looks for you.
I think external validation is a huge factor for me. It's not something I feel like I got very much growing up. And so now it's something that I really seek out in everything that I do. And I think that it does have a large impact on me. I think my impact can be the kind of, I guess, the negative side of that impact is a little different maybe than what you've experienced, where if someone is has validated me and made me feel like I'm an important part of their team or their life or anything like that, I have a really, really hard time disappointing them. Those kind of failures or like things, mistakes, they hit harder when I think somebody believes in me. And so I think I want the external validation, but it can also be scary sometimes because I know then that that person thinks highly of me. And so when I mess up, they're going to be really disappointed.
And that I feel so much of that because now that you're saying it, and I've thought about like I've changed jobs quite a few times throughout my career. And the hardest part about deciding to leave a company is deciding that like all the people that you've learned to like build these really strong relationships with and build trust and build success with is like letting them down and going to do the new and different thing. And I think that has repeatedly been the most difficult thing for me to ever do because I've truthfully loved all of the places that I've worked, even places that I might say that I hated at times, but I've learned so much. I think back to an interview I had at Gensler right before I joined, and they asked me, you're like, we look at the last place you worked and you've only been there 6 months. Why should we hire you if you're not going to stay for a long time? And I remember looking the HR manager in the eyes and said, well, I like to learn and I like to grow. And if I don't see I'm doing those things, you'll find me leaving in 6 months too. And she looked at me and she's like, Nick, I have never heard someone answer this question this way in all the interviews I have ever done. And it was like really empowering to like have that radical candor and be able to own what others would define as a failure of a job hopping and say, no, this was something of conviction that I knew what I needed. I knew what you had to offer as like your Gensler. You're like the biggest design firm in the world. I have an opportunity to work with you. Like, yeah, I'm going to go take this chance and bet on myself. To me, like getting to like the success part of the picture is like the more I realized that I should bet on myself and whether I'm going to fail or succeed, but I'm going to learn has really helped me, at least personally, own more and more of who I am. Because through failure, you come to learn that failure is not always that bad. No, very rarely someone dies that
Yeah.
you lose something or like you can never make it back. Like all the big scary boogie monsters in your head around failure, like 99% of the time, none of that's going to happen. No one's even going to remember. You're probably the only person that's going to carry that like scar with you. And so the more and more I've learned to like bet on myself and trust myself and know that like if I'll fail, I'll bounce and that I'm resourceful and all of these things. It's allowed me to have more and more confidence to step further and further out on those branches that would have otherwise seemed, why me and why am I qualified? And like that's now part of the reason why I try to share these stories is because I feel like if more people knew that it's not that scary and that you know what, if you mess up, the people who had you before will still have you after. I think more people could do bigger things if they just let themselves.
Yeah, and I think it's also whether it's like quote unquote bigger things or things that are just more meant for you. They're more fulfilling to you. And it's like you going into that interview and being like arguably too honest and saying like, yeah, if I'm not growing in 6 months, I will leave is okay, then they can say, all right, this role, we know you're probably not going to get that amount of growth that you're looking for. So you're probably not the right fit versus them trying to say, you saying, I'm looking for XYZ little things we're taught to interview and say, and them hiring you. And then in 6 months, you're like, I wanted growth. And they were like, you didn't say that.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're both in that kind of predicament. And so it's like, if you can be your full self and have that clarity, go into it with that clarity, whether it's positive or negative, you're going to find things that are more aligned with who you are than things that you're trying to force yourself into the box of
Yeah.
success.
No, it is. Yeah, it has a deep application of like honesty and expectations. And like if you're pretending to be the person that they want to hire and then you don't want that, then you're going to get, you have no right to be surprised when you don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And they did meet me. Like I got put into the G Connect program. I was put on really cool projects because I showed them that I was like, I want to do this. I want a full send. I want to grow. I want to be put in opportunities where I'm going to learn a whole heck of a lot. And that meant failing. And I had really great people around me. And that was like why I loved working at that firm as much as I did. You know, we talked one thing on the pre-call, and I think it's important, like, because we put a lot of effort into finding success, but there's also was something that we touched on was like how success is oftentimes like a moving goalpost. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm curious, like from your perspective, you know, how has success redefined itself throughout your career?
I think that is exactly how it has redefined because kind of like what we were just talking about is it has how it's redefined because I was very much trying to put myself into what I thought people wanted me to be. And my favorite quote is, "Who were you before they told you who you were supposed to be?" And it's interesting because I think also when I let go of like the idea that anyone was telling me who to be or that anyone expected certain things of me, it so much more opens the doors to be exactly who I am, have an actual clear understanding of people aren't expecting you to win every single project. People are expecting me to connect with people because that's what I'm naturally good at. So I think having those conversations of what am I good at and how can that apply to that relationship or that job or whatever it might be and having that conversation with people too because I think that's something else we do is we kind of define success but sometimes we don't say it out loud and that's this whole conversation.
Yeah. And that just, it makes me think so much. I love the quote that you just said too. And it's just, you know, I think as I'm getting older, I've stopped a little bit more and thought about like what 20-year-old me thought success looked like compared to 30-year-old me. And I'm not quite there yet, but I'm sure 40-year-old me is going to have a whole different answer. But, you know, something that, and I think COVID had a lot of unique things where like it forced us to be inside a lot and figure out how to entertain ourselves in different ways. But where I'm going with this is, has there been anything you've like rediscovered about yourself and stepping away from how people define success for you and going back to how you define who you are that you've maybe like steered away from and then found yourself going back to? And like an example for me is like I love cartoons and video games and all that stuff. And there was a brief period of my life, probably more multiple years actually, where I kind of absconded with that, and I didn't allow myself to do those things that I really truthfully loved, and kind of filled my personal cups because I was so focused on who I needed to be professionally. And then the more and more that I've broken down the walls of the box, I've learned that like those are parts of me that I'm allowed to share.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a similar experience with that?
Yeah, I love that. First of all, because
Mm.
those are awesome things. Yeah, mine's just being emotional. To be honest, I think I've always, and I think this is honestly an experience of a lot of women, specifically, is being kind of criticized or told that you're too emotional, or just feeling in general like can't we can't be emotional because that people will see that as weakness. And so for a long time, I tried to shove that down. And I think the interesting, cool thing, hard thing about emotions is the more you try to fight them, the more they fight back and say, no, you will feel this. Like,
Mhm.
and so eventually it catches up with you. And I think through ripple intent, honestly, I have been able to realize that my emotional capacity and emotional intelligence and ability to grow my emotional intelligence was far, far more of a strength than it was ever a weakness. And I was just with the wrong careers or the wrong people that were telling me that kind of stuff. And now that I've found myself in the spaces that I can explore my emotional intelligence and help lead conversations with other people about emotions, I realize that that is something really special to be celebrated instead of shamed.
No, that's really powerful because I think Ripple Intent did kind of expose me to a bit of that too. You know, construction is a world of hard asses, for lack of better words, in many cases, and like there definitely was a period of my life where I was a little bit more angry than I probably ever
Yeah.
wanted to be. And it was because I had all these emotions that I was otherwise not feeling and not letting out, and not, you know, you're taught to not fail and not be vulnerable. And then that's where that like shame word comes back, is like you see something on a project going wrong and you have some level of accountability toward it, and you get frustrated and upset when really, like, if you going back to how I was challenged to be accountable, like looking back on it, if I had just slowed down for a second and admitted I didn't understand something, or admitted I needed a little bit of help, and was able to be vulnerable, the problem would have never gotten as big as it was going to get. And so this is something that I always want, like, I love that you brought it up because I think we need to talk about emotion in this industry a lot more, because we don't allow people to feel those things. And those are the things that ultimately create usually the biggest oversights and the biggest problems on projects, is because we didn't communicate because we were afraid we were going to be perceived in some way. And so it's just,
I think
yeah.
I think that's really interesting in the industry too, because I would argue the AEC industry, I think some of the most passionate people about what we do for work. And so we expect this group of super passionate people to not have other emotions. You can only be passionate and positive about your work. You can't be anything else. And we can't talk about anything
Mm-hmm.
else besides that we love our jobs. So I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, I guess.
Yeah. So I know we're coming up at the end of an hour here, which is always a good tell that we've been having a lot of fun. Is there anything about success that you think we maybe didn't talk about, or anything you might want to challenge the audience with thinking about as we start to wrap the episode?
I kind of shared this on the pre-call, and I think we've kind of touched on it a couple of different times, but I think the inner critic that we all have that is telling us we can't do stuff, being able to just recognize why that inner critic is there and that maybe it is there to keep you safe is the first step to kind of taming it and quieting it. Because I think if you just try to, again, force yourself to be something you're not, or force that critic to be quiet, it's going to yell louder because that's what critics do. So I think that's my my takeaway that I hope people resonate with.
And I'd love to follow that up with just a little bit more, because I think That inner critic can be really loud. And I think, as Kyle said, it's sometimes the sage advice of maybe we should listen to it because it is keeping us safe. And there's sometimes it's just keeping us safe from the unknown, which could just be safe. So are there people that you've talked to or things that you've experienced that have helped you discern when the critic is valid versus when is the critic just a critic?
Shoot, I'm like very much still on that journey. But yeah, I mean, I think I've been lucky to have really amazing mentors. I think they have been some of the best people to help guide that, especially because sometimes you don't want to go to your boss and say, like, yeah, I really messed up here. But you can go, like, for me, Kyle is one of those mentors that I can go to and I can say, like, I really messed up this thing and now I'm scared and now I'm mad at myself. And he does help with that, help guide whether that's legitimate feelings or whether that's Megan being hard on herself feelings. So I would say that is probably my number one kind of people to go to is mentors that are outside of your industry or outside of, I'm a Pilates instructor and I have a Pilates mentor. And she also helps me in my business development career at Degenkolb just by giving me advice on messing up as a Pilates instructor. So I think those people, those safe people.
Mm-hmm. No, that's so powerful. It's like it doesn't even need to be of the industry. It just needs to be someone who has a translative experience, I think, that can apply or some sort of story that's familiar enough to relate to. Um, so thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your stories. Thanks to Kyle too for being a mentor to us both and helping us on these journeys and exploring these things while he's exploring them himself too. I just really appreciate you both being on the show today and the conversation that we had. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It was super fun.
I want to thank you all for listening in today. This was another fun episode and one that challenged me because I've never actually lost an internet connection during an episode before. So this is going to be fun. There's probably going to be a little slicing and dicing I have to do in order to fix that internet fiasco. You'll only know it because we'll acknowledge it, and I like to show, as we talked about on the episode, failures are part of the success. So it is going to be part of the conversation. But what I hope you took away is that the built environment is full of people who are exceptional at what they do. And oftentimes they underbelieve it. And it's not humility, it's just a pattern. It's something we all go through as people trying to do our best on all the jobs, whether it is in personal life or in professional life. And so as you go through these exercises, look back to the framework Kyle gave us for interrupting it and how Megan showcased what it means to examine these things and move past it. This conversation reminded me that the first step to building better is deciding that you're the one who gets to do it. So that's it for this episode. Thank you to Kyle and Megan for being on the show. Thank you for everyone who's listening. If this conversation names something you might have been carrying, share it with someone who needed to hear it. Lift somebody up who you think needs a little bit of spotlight, and go talk to your mentors about things that you're working through. Because if there's anything that this episode proved, it's that we do not do it alone. Subscribe if you haven't, leave a rating if you have, and until next time, stay wired to build.